Welcome back to Blatantly Honest with Makaila Nichols. Today, I caught up with Matt Newman. He's the best selling author of Starting at the Finish Line, a book geared toward his own struggle with brain cancer. Matt is a keynote speaker and hopes to inspire others to plan in advance of the bad and how to live life in the present. Welcome, Matt. What are you looking forward to most in 2021?
It's a great question because we get very caught up in what happened yesterday, and there's such a focus on the past. And what we don't realize is we're in this world of evolution. And I could talk about that from the universe. We're like a ball that's always rolling forward. There's so
Mhm.
much of woulda, coulda, shoulda, and all this. When the reality is what could I take from the past to be better going forward? And I would tell you, I could talk about children, I could talk about family, and I could talk about love. I would think the thing I'm going to take into 2021 is to continue to enhance the virtual technology that is utilized to connect with people. As we're realizing for business, for life, for conversation, it's becoming much more efficient. And it's not going to be one of those, I can't wait to go back to old ways. There are no old ways. It's all about moving forward. Change does two things: it breeds complacency or it breeds opportunity. So I would utilize that to continue to get better in a variety of different areas of connecting with people the way they want to connect, and start asking more of the question of, do you want to talk virtually? Do you want to talk in person? Do you want to have this meeting over the phone? And then they will feed back what they want, and we could honor it that way instead of us saying, here's the way we want to do it because of the old ways.
I'm with you on that. The old ways I feel like are so out the door. I mean, we're finding that people don't really need to go into an office anymore, which is sad. I mean, I have been at home for way too long, and it's crazy because I know you and I are used to getting on flights and traveling and all that, but there's no set place to go into this office anymore. And I think we're going to find like a lot of these big companies are moving their offices from like California to across the country, and because there's just no point. And we're realizing like we can just get on a Zoom, we can talk like this. Obviously, it's not the same, like not trying to say it is, but it's just different. So with that being said, what kind of technologies do you find yourself using now so more than you used to?
There's no question Zoom. That would be the first one. I've always been very into technology, not as some expert of some type, but something I've always embraced change. So when something new came out, it was like, oh, for this Fitbit watch is great. It's phenomenal for exercise and whatnot. And then the iWatch came out. And it was like, ooh, that thing's way better. I believe going forward that what we're talking on right now is like buying the StarTech phone from the early 2000s. This is the original phone. This is where people lose sight about the ball rolling. I want you to think about what this is going to look like in 3 years. We're going to be like two holograms sitting having coffee in the same room together and connecting differently. I've done meetings with people in the variety of business I'm affiliated with where we're doing docu-signs right on a Zoom right there, and we're getting things done, which avoided travel, which avoided wasting of time. But here's the point I'll bring up, and I have no stake in this. Wait till Apple gets into the virtual game of what we're doing. They've had FaceTime forever. Fitbit was there, boom, they blew them out with the watches. Then it was Beats headphones and all this. Boom, AirPods came out. We all saw that they went after Peloton this week when they came out with the fitness on the watch, Apple. Anybody who thinks they're not going to be building this virtual technology for meetings, and I think it's a much bigger deal than people realize. And I could share a story with you if you'd like on this.
Yeah, I'd love
So
to hear it.
I went every 6 months now. I go for brain cancer tests. I was diagnosed at 39 years old. It was a new perspective on life. I was given this new set of lenses. The reality is, you hear you got brain cancer, you're going to die. I had 3 kids. I had a father-in-law dying of pancreatic cancer at our house. It's a story that led to a lot of what we'll talk about today. But what's interesting is 6 months in March, no, it was May, excuse me, of this year. Pandemic is in full stride. I'm going for my 6 month checkup. And what I will do is I'll go in, I'll get an MRI, I'll get an MRA, I'll be in the tube for an hour, I'll come out, deal with some stuff, and they'll say the same thing to me every time. Matt, everything looks great. We have no idea what you're doing. Remember, this will most likely grow back, and we'll see you later. And I'm always like, you could leave the growing back part out. I don't need to hear about that. So what happens is they call me up and they go, are you incapacitated? I go, no. They go, you're not allowed to bring anybody to the hospital with the pandemic. I go, I understand. And my wife usually comes with me. She sits in the other room. This May will be my 8 year anniversary of being diagnosed with this brain tumor. And I went by myself, and it was apocalyptic. It was archaic. There was this nobody there. I was the only person. I took a selfie of myself. I don't take selfies. I was the only person in the hospital. I go do my tests. They give me that same good news. Remind me, we'll see you in 6 months because, it's most likely going to grow back. And I'm like, stop saying that part. I leave. I come back and I have a little growth on my rib cage right here. It's been there forever. It's probably nothing. But I have cancer on my mind. I'm thinking about my children. I'm thinking about always being careful. I'm always thinking about preparing in advance of the bad, having a plan in place prior to the negative, which is what we preach all the time. I'm like, I should probably get that checked out, like just to be safe. So I asked my wife, I go, who's our dermatologist? She's like, well, call this person. This is the person I use. I go, okay. The average person calls a dermatologist. You're waiting 6 to 10 weeks to get in to see him. That's the way it is. I called the dermatologist up. I go, I don't think this is anything, but I want you to check it out. 3 minutes later, we were on Zoom doing a teledoc where they're looking at it. They're checking it out. They go, Mr. Newman, we don't think it's anything, but if you'd like, you can come down, come in with a mask on. We'll clip it, send it out. We'll call you in a week. I go, I think I'm going to do that. Here's my point. My point is this. A week later, I get called and told it's nothing. But instead of waiting 6 to 10 weeks, they addressed it immediately with me. That doctor gets paid the same amount as if I was going to come in 6 to 10 weeks later, becomes more efficient for them. They get compensated again for me coming in and clipping it, as they should. I have no problem with that in any way. But who thinks they're going backwards right there with that? The ability to do teledocs, the ability to talk to our attorneys. I did a Zoom last night with a group of investors I'm in with the attorney that we do with. These are people from all over the country. We're never going to fly out and all meet each other ever again. This is so much easier. So anyone who's not embracing this and seeing where it's going, the world's rolling by you. You're going to become antiquated.
Definitely. Wow, what a great story. I've also utilized the telehealth, which is just so weird. I'm like, there's no way that they're gonna know if there's something wrong with me, blah, blah, blah. But anyway, it is efficient. So let's backtrack a little because you kind of danced over your cancer and everything. And I really want to talk about that because I think it's so important. So let's go back 1 year before you're diagnosed with stage 3 brain cancer. You're 38 years old, you have 3 kids under 5. I'm sure you had your hands full and you're super into fitness. Would you consider yourself like the typical sports dad?
Maybe. My kids were really young at that point. So they're
Yeah.
playing t-ball. I mean, it's really basic. It's a different world now. But from a sports dad, I don't know. I don't think so because I was a big believer and I got a scholarship to play soccer in college at the University of Delaware. So you got to go out and earn it and you got to get it. But they were so young that there was this different perspective of just watching them running around, laughing, watching them, do foolish things when they're trying to play soccer, tripping over the ball and whatnot. I was very privileged to be able to be a part of that. And because my father-in-law had been going through pancreatic cancer, who was diagnosed at 60 years old, you learn more about living in the moment and appreciating the now. It's not you directly, it's a family member. When it becomes you directly, everything changes and becomes more concise on the way that you interpret things. But I found that I was a guy who worked really hard, built up a really great career, never thought I'd be in the situation that I was. And you do have that moment of like, well, everything's going so great, pinch me. I mean, I can't believe it. We lived in the city. We built our home out in the suburbs. We had 3 children. I was the luckiest guy in the world to have met my wife. But the reality is change happens. And every one of us has something that we're dealing with. There's no rainbows and unicorns across the world. Sometimes many of us hide it. Sometimes many of us need to get it out of our system because it's cathartic. It becomes an outlet. But the reality is, for all that, there's always going to be life like a roller coaster where things are going to go up and down. And unfortunately, I learned that very quickly after my father-in-law was diagnosed.
I can't imagine. Pancreatic cancer is just terrifying. I mean, that is the one type of, I mean, there's obviously a bunch of really serious, including brain cancer. How was that experience having him be diagnosed and then you also being diagnosed with brain cancer?
Well, I'll tell you, my first experience with cancer happened when I was 15 years old. My Grandma Harriet, was diagnosed with cancer. I wasn't old enough to understand it or digest it or truly understand the ramification of what's really happening. But I remember one day she was Grandma Harriet. The next day she was wearing a cancer turban. And the next day she was gone. What I deeply remember is what it did to my mother. My mom talked to my grandmother every single day on the phone. Every weekend, we were at their house in Fair Lawn, New Jersey. They were at our house in Parsippany, New Jersey. I watched my mom cry and she couldn't stop. I watched her become a different person. It built up this anger, this hatred that I had for cancer. Cancer didn't care about us. It didn't care about our family. It did what it wanted, when it wanted. And I just was I wish I could have been there more. I wish I could have gone. I could have hugged my mom more. I'm 15. It didn't make sense to me. It didn't resonate till much later in life. And my mother and my grandmother were two peas in a pod. My wife was very similar with my father-in-law. What's interesting is that we grew up in very different environments. I was a Jewish guy who grew up in northern Jersey. My mom was a teacher. My dad was a financial advisor. My wife grew up in mining country, Pennsylvania. And unfortunately, that beautiful mining area, it's opioid affected now. All the mines have closed down. She grew up in a 400 square foot row home, Catholic family. My father-in-law was a highway construction worker. My mother-in-law was a janitor. It was two completely different environments that we grew up in. But you realize none of that matters. You connect at the heart. And that's the realness of it. And when my father-in-law, was diagnosed, we had two children. My wife was pregnant with our third. And she made it her full-time job to do whatever she needed to do to take care of him. She took care of us. She took care of the kids. She's pregnant. She drives him down to the University of Pennsylvania hospital for his Whipple procedure. Back and forth every day, chemo, radiation. She never bitched. She never complained. She did what she needed to do to be there for her family. And I was honored to have her as my wife. It was inspirational to watch. You saw what real love is all about. And my father-in-law had two goals. One was he wanted to see all three of his grandkids born. Reality is you get pancreatic cancer, you probably got about a 6-month shelf life. You don't feel the ramifications of that till it's already spread into your liver and all these other areas. Number two was he wanted to be alive long enough for them to be old enough to have real life memories of him. He was a warrior. I was the proudest son-in-law you could imagine. And his roller coaster would go up and down. 2.5 years into it, I got in a car accident in a town called Bridgewater, New Jersey. Miserable, icy, snowy day. I didn't even do anything wrong. I'm pulling up to the traffic light. My car just hydroplanes right into the car in front of it, flips into the median. I'm holding on to that steering wheel. The airbag goes off and I'm thinking, all that working out I do is for this moment right now. And I got out of the car without a scratch on my body. And the police come running over. They're like, dude, you got to get to the hospital right now. And I was like, no, man, beast mode. I'm okay. And I called my wife. And she was taking a little break from Larry, my father-in-law's chemotherapy. And she was shopping at a place called the King of Prussia Mall, which I'm sure a lot of your listeners have heard of. And I told her what happened. She goes, you got to go to the hospital right now. I go, no, I'm okay. She goes, don't forget about our friend Karen. And we have a friend named Karen Mancini, and is driving to a town called Bluebell, Pennsylvania. She pulls up to a traffic light and a car T-bones her. She's okay. The police bring her to the hospital just to make sure she's going to be all right. 3 hours later, the doctors come out and say, we want you to send flowers and a thank you note to the person that hit you. We just found a brain aneurysm. You'd have been dead in 5 hours. I thought about my wife. I thought about my children. And like a type A personality, we brought my car back down on a tow truck and I rented one and went on my way. And that night when I got home, my head was killing me. I'm like, did I bang my head during that accident? And my wife, Rebecca, suffers from chronic migraines. Larry's sitting on the couch. His roller coaster is going down, getting beat up from chemotherapy. I got 3 kids now running all over the place that are little. And I'm just going, oh, my head. I remember my wife looking at me going, did you go to the hospital? I go, no. She goes, try getting chronic migraines. I don't want to hear about it. It wasn't about me. It was about Larry. It was about my children. But over the next 2 weeks, the pain got more and more severe every single day. 2 weeks into it, I lost all ability to sleep. Larry and I'd be sitting on the couch together. I'd fall asleep from 8:30 to 10, pass out, and I'd wake up in massive pain. It got worse and worse. I speak basically professionally. I'm giving a speech on finance, on preparation, on why we need to learn to plan in advance of the bad. The U.S. education system doesn't teach our children this. They have to have some plan in place to alleviate regret, resentment. It's the basics that we should know that we're not gifted with. And as I was giving a speech, I felt a hot flash hit me in the face. And then slur and gurgle just poured out of my mouth. I didn't know where I was. I didn't know what was going on. And I remember seeing myself standing outside my body going, you're having a stroke. You are having a stroke right now. I got myself together. I'm like, oh, I think I got a sinus infection, head pain. Let's bounce back into this. Over the next, call it 6 weeks, I had 9 more of these. I had one while I
Nine.
was training for the Broad Street Run in Philadelphia. I had one while I was giving a speech. I had one while I was driving. I had one while I was talking to people. On May 14th, 2013, I was giving a speech in front of 300 people in my hometown of Parsippany, New Jersey. And for the 11th time, I felt a hot flash hit me in the face. I knew what was going on. I turned my back on everybody so I could point to a PowerPoint to try and kill this 5 to 6 second period of slur and gurgle. That was the moment I decided I was going to the hospital right then and there. I leave the meeting, call my wife. She's actually at King of Prussia again, taking a little break from Larry. Apparently, we're putting their children through college. And I told her I'm going to go to Capitol Health in Hopewell, New Jersey. I need to get there right now. She says, I'll meet you there. I have an hour and a half ride. I'm like, all right, this is cool. Doctors are going to fix it. They'll figure it out. I don't, maybe I'm going to die. I don't know. So I get down there. We go to, they bring me in. They go, we're going to give you a CAT scan. I'm like, CAT scan? Cool, man. Like an x-ray. No big deal. So they give me a CAT scan. And 3 hours later, they come in and go, we know the problem. I'm like, yes, diagnose it, fix it. What's the deal? Mr. Newman, you got a lesion on the left frontal lobe of your brain. Now, one of the mistakes people make in business, doctors, lawyers, finance, is we talk our vernacular. To me, a lesion is like a cut or a bruise. I'm like, freaking car accident, man. Probably dinged it and just don't remember it. Causing massive pain. I'm like, yes, sir. Causing you not to sleep. I'm like, right on, dude. He goes, and you're not having strokes. You're having seizures in your speech and memory on the left frontal lobe of your brain. As tough as it sounds, I was like, yeah, I was actually like fired up. I'm like, that's it.
That's
But
it.
finally, yeah, all right, cool. What do we got to do to fix it, Matt? We got to give you an MRI, blah, 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 all this other stuff. So I go in and out of the MRI tube. At 3:00 in the morning, they go, we got to do one more. We have to do it with contrast. So my wife looks at me. She goes, I'm going to go home. I'll live 5 minutes from the hospital. I'm going to make lunch for our children who are 5, 3, and 2. I'm going to find a ride for my dad for his chemotherapy. And I'll be back in an hour. They're going to put me in the tube anyway. Just take your time. So the nurse comes down. She's like, all right, Mr. Newman, jump in the wheelchair. I'm like, I've had it with the wheelchair. I'm done. I'll walk down there. I just did the Broad Street Run 8 days ago. Beast mode, man. I don't need that. She goes, liability. You have to get in the wheelchair.
Can't argue with that.
Yeah, so I get in the wheelchair and I feel her grab the clipboard off the back of it. She goes, all right, Mr. Newman, MRI. Now we got to do a contrast so we could see how big your brain tumor is. I go, it's a lesion. And that's the moment at 39 I was diagnosed with brain cancer.
And she told you just like that. And
She did nothing wrong, by the way. The doctors just used their own vernacular. I don't hold any anger or animosity. She was reading the chart. That's what it said on there. She wasn't a doctor. She wasn't a surgeon. But that was the moment clarity sunk in. And it hit me pretty hard at that moment.
And I'm sure you were glad you were sitting for that because I can't imagine. I mean, I'm just sure everything in your body just, I mean, what went through your head? I want to know what to do.
Yeah, so basically, they brought me into the MRI tube, and I was there for an hour and a half, and my head was all over the place. They brought me back out afterwards, and they put me in this little bed, and they plugged me into about 30 machines. I just started to cry. I started a retrospective on life, and I started to think about my children. I started thinking about my wife, my family. My wife's got a dad dying of cancer. She's got a husband dying of cancer. We got 3 kids, and strength is not how big your arms are. Strength is not how much you bench press. Strength is something that's located deep down in our bellies, that at the deepest and darkest of times, we could find it, we can grab it, and we can own it. I didn't know I had it in me. I saw it. I took it. It was mine. This is my journey. Cancer is just along for the ride. I got a new set of lenses. I'm seeing life differently, and I just started cursing my brains out. And the nurses come running in to tell the story to this day. And they're like, oh my God, are you okay? I was like, I'm fine. That was my pity party. If I'm going down, I'm going down swinging. No more pity. And it was like pouring gasoline on a fire. I didn't know I had that in me. We all do. We all have that thing we could find. Some of us resist it. We don't want to grab it. But from my perspective, once I saw it, I realized that I will never be defined for a disease. We own that. There's some diseases that will take us physically. They will never take us spiritually, and they will never be the definition of who we are and the memory that we're leaving. If we allow that to be the disease, that's on our shoulders right there. And all of a sudden, I started to have a different perspective and view on life. I understood the fragility of it, the realness. And as odd as it sounds, I had no fear from that point forward. Nothing. At no point did it bother me. Whatever we were going to do, we were going to do. And a couple minutes later, the surgeon comes walking in with my wife, and my wife's wiping her eyes. Dad's got cancer. He's going to die. And her husband's got cancer. He's going to die. She's got 3 kids. And he looks at me and goes, let me tell you what we're going to do. I go, let me tell you what you're going to do. You're going to get this crap out of my head, and I'm going to take care of the rest. He goes, don't move. Comes back in. He goes, Mr. Newman, it's Wednesday. Friday, we're going to do a major craniotomy. We're going to cut half your skull here, pull it back, take your jaw, take the tumor out. We won't know the severity of it for 10 days. But I want you to read this study. And it was a study from the American Medical Association. It was on recovery. There's some diseases, like I said, there's nothing you could do, but you could dictate your legacy that you own. Nobody could take that from you. But what it did talk about, some diseases you have a chance to beat. And the number one thing that you need to do that is attitude. And as I'm reading this, it talked about something called the downward spiral. We've all heard the story of the couple that's been married for 50 years. Wife's healthy as a horse. Husband gets cancer and dies. What do we often hear happens 6 months later? She dies. Regret, resentment, negativity, you fall into it. When you fall into that, the odds of getting out of it are unbelievably unlikely. It's a hard way to swim your way out of that. And all I'm sitting here thinking is, oh man, now I'm even more fired up right now. And my father-in-law, my mother-in-law, and my parents are on the way down. And all I talk about in my career is finance, protection, planning. It's not about investments. It's not about all this garbage that we hear about. It's about legal documentation, your will, your power of attorney. It's being able to have stuff there that you can do on LegalZoom for $19 where you can go, okay, I don't have to worry about that. And I practiced everything I preached. And I remember turning to my wife, going, give me the iPad. She's like, yeah, they're going to be here in 20 minutes. Do you want to watch a movie? I'm like, no, just give me the iPad. And that was the moment I realized I had to make sure everything was cleaned up on my end, because there's a good chance I might not get out of the surgery. First thing I did is pulled up my will. Done. Power of attorney, which means if I become incapacitated, Rebecca's going to be able to do all the things that she needs to get done. My life insurance. Did it matter really to me when I was single or I just got married? No, but I had 3 children. I had a home. There was more responsibility I'd been taking on to not protect that, because people want what they can't get. They want life insurance after they can't get it. They want long-term care after they can't get it. They want some financial advice after they lose 30%. It's about having a plan in place prior. All my life insurance is done. College planning, mortgages. It's not about the amount of money you have. It's about the planning you do to define your legacy to your family of how important they were to you. And that was the moment I realized that every speech I ever gave was about me. I didn't think I was talking about myself, but I knew this. Now I'm going to swing even harder. They'll never get over me not being here if I'm not. But their lives, their way of living, they'd be able to enjoy the moments. They will be the same as if I was going to be there, because all the planning that was done, basic stuff. And it hit me pretty hard. But all it is inspire confidence and motivation.
Oh, I'm processing all that. That's just, I cannot imagine the fact that you ask for the iPad, let alone and to do all that, because that's something, I always think, and not to be like a negative person, but sometimes you're driving, you're like, well, what if, what if, what if? And then it hits you and it's like, oh crap, like the what if is here. With that being said, I mean, what was going through your head? Were you thinking like this could be the end? Like, were you scared of the end? Or were you like, I'm just going to keep going no matter what?
This is going to sound really interesting. At no point did I ever think there was ever a chance that everything was going to work out. I don't know where that comes from, because if I would have heard it about a friend, I would have been like, oh God, I hope they're going to be okay. The minute we had that moment with the surgeon, like when I went into surgery, I wasn't nervous. I cannot explain to you why. I wish I had this recipe that I can give of here's how it's going to be, because everybody has to find their own ways of dealing things. You hear like, here's what I did. Well, that doesn't mean it's going to happen for somebody else, but I could use that to pontificate off what I could find that's going to be, my outlet, my catharsis, my way of dealing with it. I was never nervous. I don't know why. At first I was, like I said, I started crying. Every tear I shed after that was about living in the moment, appreciating the now, and happiness. And I didn't know I had that in me. I really didn't. But I had this new perspective where the way it was explained to me was, well, if other people could do this, why can't I? And that's why I talk a lot about how important it is to share stories of success with people, not about the amount of money they make and all that, but to be able to give someone who's going through a difficult time, regardless whether it's depression, cancer, disease, whatever it is. You can sit there and give them all the statistics they want. It's a bunch of shtick nobody cares about. You share with them a story of someone's on a similar path to them, something they relate to, that can change their perspective. And that leaves an indelible mark on what you did to them. I'll never go through remission. I'll never be done with this. So no, I'm okay. I'm okay with that. So I went through chemo. I went through radiation. They didn't expect it to be grade 3. They thought it was going to be, maybe you won't need anything, but it was more aggressive. And every 3 months I would go in and get an MRI and an MRI. Then it went to every 4 months, every 5 months. And we just started every 6 months now. I'm going to tell you something most people wouldn't expect to hear. I'd do it every week if they wanted me to go in there. With the brain tumor that I have, if it's going to grow back, most likely it's going to grow back in the same spot. The earlier they would catch it, they'd be able to do more with it. So if they wanted, everybody cares more about it but me. I'm like, if they want to come every week, I'll go. Does it suck going? Yeah. But weirdly enough, I don't even think about it until the day I go. This is my life. I own it. I'm not giving that up. Cancer's just riding shotgun with me. So I can tell you, if I'm going to the hospital tomorrow, I won't even think about it till tomorrow. Otherwise, I'm allowing it to be cancer's life. It's not. It's mine. And I don't know where I got the strength to be able to do that, but I truly do not think about it until I have to.
What words of advice do you have for someone who might let cancer take priority in their life? That's like, they're down in that downward spiral, so to speak. What advice do you have for them to change their mindset like you did?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because some of the hardest things to do is alter. When we go through life altering events, change is what becomes initiated. And you have to embrace that change. And many don't, from a variety of ways, whether it's from the technology, whether it's disease. They just want to go back to the old ways. What I try to portray to people is very simply, you're not alone on your journey. There's others of us. And don't forget, the actions you're doing now will define you. How do you want to be defined? And for me, sharing mine and talking about it and writing, I 100% did for myself. I can tell you that, and I'll share this with you. When I was started to go through this, for all the optimism, I would send these emails out to friends and family. I would shoot it out on my new perspective, my new understanding of life, the gift I was giving, about living in the moment, moments with my children that were hard to really explain. And I would send them out. And the reason I would send them out is because for everything you feel gifted with, for all this new understanding of life, reality is you're pushing some evil crap right down someplace. If that doesn't find an outlet, you're going to combust. My outlet became writing. I never expected that. So I would write, and I would write when I needed it. I never read one message after I wrote it. I would email it out, and I was like, oh, it's like vomit. Oh, I feel better. 4 years into it, we had 20,000 people following my emails. Every day I would get, could you put this person on? I never thought about it. I just put them on there. And here's the lesson that I was given with this. Cancer is like buying a car. You buy a car, you leave the lot, you go, look at that. I see the car everywhere. Wrong. Car was always there. You just never noticed it till you had a direct connection to it. I learned that cancer affects everybody in every way, but it's not just cancer. Depression, suicide, disease. It's everybody has their alteration that they're hiding behind. They want to know, not, hey, what are the statistics I'm going to make it? But they want inspiration. They want motivation. I never asked to do any of that in any way whatsoever. This was just my catharsis was to get it out. What I learned is that most people, they don't want to talk about it unless it's with someone who's been on a similar journey. So I decided 4 years into it, I was going to write a book. I 100% was doing this for myself. It was cathartic. It made me feel better. I was giving speeches. So on March 23rd, 2018, my book came out. It's called Starting at the Finish Line. I called my mother in Parsippany, New Jersey. I go, hey, Ma, book's coming out tonight. I am going to tell you word for word what she said to me. No one's ever going to buy that, right? I go, oh, God, no. Some jerk off. What do they want to hear about it? She goes, but you're going to put 3 copies in your safe. And when your children are older, they'll be able to read the realness of what actually happened. I said, Mom, I couldn't agree with you more. 1 week later, we were #1 on Amazon in 4 different categories, and my jaw hit the ground. There was no ghostwriter. There was no business plan. There was no I wasn't even on social media. I was like, oh my God. And so I decided to go on social media. And for all the underbelly of it and the negativity there is, all of a sudden I started to communicate with people all over the world that I never expected to happen, sharing me these stories because they felt comfortable talking about it. And all of a sudden I get a call from ESPN that they want to put me on it. I thought it was my brother Crank calling me. I'm not even making that up. I was like, yeah, nice try right there, right there. Then I did a bunch of TED Talks, and then things started to change, and you realized what people are really looking for: rawness, purity, real. And I was doing this for me. And you started to read, that was the moment, that was one of the solidifying moments where I stopped believing in irony.
Wow. I got teary-eyed. I don't know if you can see my eyeballs from this far away, but when you were talking about putting the book in the safe for your kids, like, God, I need to do that I don't have kids yet, but like just thinking about that is just so powerful. And the fact that, you're not on social media and people do want to see realness. I mean, that's like the end all be all, because social media is just so fake. And like, coming from a young person, I still consider myself pretty young. And it's just sad because everyone's like posting me, 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 me. And it's just not real. So I commend you for sharing your story in a way that's it's blatantly honest, so to speak. And it's not perfect and it's not pretty, but it's real.
I appreciate that. Thank you. And it's interesting when it first went out. Again, it was for myself. And it was like, yeah, my wife and kids will read it and all this other stuff. And then when we got like the #2 brain cancer book of all time by Book Authority, I'm just sitting there going, what? And but it's not about that. It was about allowing people to have a better understanding that they're not alone. Things happen to other. My business is going great. Fitness all the time. Young family, building a boom. Everything changes on a dime. It happens to everybody, and they're all dealing with some monster that they have to take on and try to alleviate that in some fashion or another. But the point that I started to have a better understanding of was also connection and hitting people in the heartstrings. And whether it's business, whether it's family, whether it's life, it's a little personal things that we do. And I point out, we'll have someone who says, hey, I just got you this set of golf balls or whatever. I write personal notes to people. I put them inside of books. I do things that I think will really mean something to them. And it's not about the amount of money you spend. It's about the effort showing you really learned about someone. And that drives on so many different levels. It it brings better business. It brings better connection. It builds better relationship. It shows you're listening. It shows that you care. And there's a part of me that goes, I was always good at this before. I have no problem saying that. I became a better person, but I was looking back, and I was happy with myself prior, but I had to go through this bag of crap to learn some of the most basic lessons in life. Like, whatever happens tomorrow is great. Whatever happened yesterday is irrelevant. It's about right now. And can I share a quick story with you on that?
I would love that.
So after my surgery, I wouldn't know the ramifications of the tumor for 10 days. So my wife picks me up in front of Capitol Health. They bring me out in a wheelchair. It's the same car I dropped off 6 days earlier. I have a second head. I'm an absolute train wreck. They put me in the car, and we drive to my house. We have one of those side entrances on our driveway where you can go in and just go into the side. And I walk in, and my 3 kids, Luke, Jake, and Lola, 5, 3, and 2, are holding signs that say, I love you, Daddy. Thank you so much for coming home. I started to cry, but I cried out of happiness, like I mentioned earlier. This was our moment. This is why I fight. This is what I do things for. I went up to my bed. I fell asleep for 13 hours. Home is where the heart is. This is where I wanted to be. This is what I fought for, to get back to the people that I love. And on day 5, my son Luke was having his 5-year-old picnic at school with dads. And that day, my wife looks at me. She goes, you don't have to go to this. I go, I will never, ever miss this in a million years. Larry's sitting there still going through his chemotherapy as his roller coaster is heading downwards. And my wife goes, "Do you want to come with me to drop him off at school?" I go, "I do." So I get in the car and ride shotgun. We take him to school. My wife takes Luke and Jake to their 3 and 5-year-old classes. I take my little 2-year-old Lola. I hold her little hand. I take her to her classroom. She takes her little pink jacket off. She puts it on the hook. And she looks at me and goes, "I love you, Daddy. Thank you for taking me to class." I go, "Why don't I do this more?" And here's the ridiculous part. You know what I used to do in the past? I'd be taking her to class going, "All right, let me check my phone. Where's my next appointment?" It's not about that. This was her moment. It's the lessons that I'm teaching her. I was teaching her in the past that it's okay that I'm not making it about you. I'm making it about me, about my business, about this. That day, my phone was in the car. I was euphoric. I was rainbows and unicorns. I had to go through this to learn this. And around 11:30, my wife looks at me. She goes, "You are banged up. Go to bed." I go, "I'm going to this." And she brings me up to the school. And Luke's waiting at the door and he gives me a hug and goes, "I love you, Daddy." And I'm just crying out of happiness to be there. I go, "I love you, pal." And what you were supposed to do is have a brown bag lunch and sit in the backyard for 30 minutes. And then you leave. I got that brown bag lunch. I'm hugging him like you wouldn't believe. We're walking into the backyard and we sit down. And this is our moment. It's not about tomorrow. It's not about yesterday, but it's about right now. It's clear now. I get it. And I'm going to tell you what I saw. I saw every dad like this. And I went, "Oh my God, that was me." Back then I had a BlackBerry and an iPhone. My phone was in the car again that time. And I was never going to give back the lessons that I was gifted with. And that's part of the deal. You want to hit me with cancer? There's something I could take. Most of us have to find what it is that we could take to make ourselves better and never give it back. And I had to learn the lesson of how to never forget it as well, too. And that's something that I take very dearly. And I will never give those lessons back, but you have to do things to make sure you don't forget.
What a beautiful moment that you got to share with your kids. And it's sad that a lot of parents, you're right. I mean, I'm guilty of it too, just being behind our phone and not being present. And I think what you said is going to wake a lot of people up because you're right. It is about living in the present and not thinking too far in the future or what's next or what was yesterday and just being present and being there for your kids. So you were just absolutely incredible. And it is a true honor to have had you on the podcast. And
Oh, thank you so much.
I could listen to you talk all day about these stories because it's what people need to hear. And it's just, even though we are adapting and even though we are doing this on Zoom, it goes
Yeah.
back to the simplicity of just being there and being transparent and being open and being there for the ones we love. So thank you for sharing this time with me today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was an absolute honor. And anything I could do for you or anyone listening to this, they can contact us. And again, thank you so much. Be bold, be you, and be blatantly honest.